I'm really happy to be here. Also quite excited. It's my first time here in Shanghai on such a community event. And I was actually only a small part of the product management team in Munich. You know, I moved to Beijing 1.5 years ago. Before that, I was in Munich and was part of the product management team. I had really great colleagues, and I didn't develop the Alexa, but I was a part of the whole ecosystem. So my thing was the electronic control system for the camera. I did, maybe some of you know the WCO4 hand unit. That was my baby, and thank you. And it was a lot of fun, and I must say I'm always really humbled to see you guys, because you're actually the ones using the equipment. We at ARRI, we do this all for you since more than 100 years. And I actually met Tayo, or I saw Tayo on YouTube because he made a video about the Alexa 35, about our latest model. And I asked my colleague, do you know him? Because I didn't know him, and she said, no, I don't know him, but I contact him. And she wrote a message to Tayo, and then a couple of weeks later we met. And he then was inviting me here to the Limecut talk and asked me if I can say something, and suggested the topic of the history of Alexa and what that camera is. And I thought that's actually really interesting topic. Before I made a lot of product presentations, but never really the history of the camera. And I think even nowadays, it is especially interesting to see where that camera actually came from, how it developed, and why it is the way it is right now. And to prepare this presentation, I thought back in the days I started 2010 at ARRI. That was exactly the time when the Alexa was launched. And it was a great time. It was a new camera. It was the first really serious digital camera from ARRI. And it was very, very received. And yeah, I like really thinking back to those days. Yeah, and then I put the material together. I researched a little bit. I also talked to old colleagues. My colleague Mark Schüppmann-Müller, for example, who was actually the product manager for the camera and also the film cameras before, and put this together. So now many great films over the years were shot with the Alexa camera. And do you know the camera? Did you ever put a hand on it? Are you familiar with it? Yeah. Okay, so telling the story, you know, I started from today, and I was thinking, okay, today we have this camera, and we made it for a reason the way it is today. But why actually did we make the Alexa in the first place? How did it all start? And then of course I thought of the film cameras and so on, and I thought many steps back, and I ended up. And don't be scared; it's not a very old-fashioned history lesson now, but I found actually the story starts in the story of Alexa somehow starts in the year 1888. That was the first known piece of motion picture film that at least I found that is available today. It's called the Roundhay Garden Scene, and it was shot in a suburb of Leeds in Roundhay, in UK, with 12 frames per second. It was shot on Kodak material, paper-based material. And the guy who did this was called Louis-Aimé Augustin Le Prince. And he's not really known because a few years after he did this, he went on a train with all his equipment and was never seen again. And there are a lot of conspiration theories, what happened to them. Some people say maybe the Lumiere brothers sent a hitman. Others say maybe Mr. Eastman wanted to get him away, but he was never seen again. Then the first really documented commercial projection was in 1895 with the premiere with the Lumiere brothers, and they had a device called the cinematograph. It's a box you see there in the middle, and you could shoot a film with it, develop somehow in it, and then also project with it. That is how you see what you see on the right side. And it used a film with only one perforation per frame. And yeah, that was the first really known public viewing of like a cinema. Now let's look at the medium. In the 19th century, the early photography, that was actually glass plates with the emulsion put on it. And to take the picture, the emulsions, the material must be wet. So within like 10 minutes, you had to prepare the negative and then take the picture and develop it afterwards. The chemicals were quite poisonous partly, and that is maybe also why the camera assistants, back in the days, they also had already camera assistants. It doesn't look particularly happy on the image. Now here you see George Eastman and also Thomas Edison. George Eastman is the one on the left side, and he is actually the one who founded Kodak. Yeah, Kodak is probably familiar to many of you from the film side. And he found a technology or method for creating films that don't have to be wet, that can be dry, that can be exposed at a different time than when they were made. The other guy on the right side is Thomas Edison, is also a very famous inventor. And he was playing with a Kodak camera in 1989 and used a 70mm unperforated film. And he also had a device on the right side called the kinetoscope that was designed for viewing a film only one person. So you had to look in it from the top and watch a movie. And Mr. Edison really didn't believe in public viewing. He thought that movies should be made in a way that you can watch it alone. Probably it was also the business case. Probably he thought he can sell more devices if he doesn't make that public. Because, of course, if you make it in a big hall and 200 people are watching, you only sell one projector. But if you make it that everybody has to have a device, you make much more money. Yeah. So he was asking Mr. Eastman if he had a film for his device, and Mr. Eastman was asking him, well, how wide do you like it? And he just made a gesture like this. At least that's the story, how it's told. And then he made that film in the 35mm format, the way we know today, was born. Probably also just wanted to save some money because, of course, a slimmer film is less material, is cheaper. So there were many film formats out there at that time. And in around 1900, the film industry was growing considerably. And many companies were actually located on the East Coast of the USA. And because there was a lot of money to be made, there were also a lot of patent lawsuits. And in order to end these fights, in 1908, the 9 largest motion picture companies combined their patents and founded the Motion Picture Patents Company, which is also called the Edison Trust. And this helped really greatly standardize the 35mm format with 4 perforations. Now, many people didn't want to pay the license fees at that time, so they moved away as far as possible from the East Coast to the very west of the US to a little town called Hollywoodland. In Hollywoodland, it was, much more difficult to follow the patent rights throughout the continent. And also, this place had very much sun, very much light, which was important for the very unsensitive films back in those days. and also nice, diverse sceneries to shoot at. And even though the people didn't really know, and you know, by that time the 35mm format was very established, and even though the people didn't know that format, 35mm without sound at the side for perforations would later be called Super 35 format. This was then first standardized in 1917 by a new standards body called the Society of Motion Picture Engineers, SMPE. And later that became the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, which you might have heard about. And around that time, in 1917, even a little bit earlier, there were two friends in Munich, Germany and Bavaria, and they were film enthusiasts. They were a little bit like Tayo and all the other guys really liked shooting films. They had their own cameras and they made some Western movies in the Bavarian, you know, mountains at the Bavarian River, the Isar River in Munich. And they really liked to do this and also rented out their equipment to some friends and so on. And whenever they saw something they could improve, they did that. They were also really hands-on. They liked to design their own solutions, find ways to make it happen. And in 1917, on September 12th, they officially founded their company called ARRI, which is the first two letters of both their names. They were called Robert Richter and August Arnold. So Arnold and Richter is ARRI. And yeah, that is how ARRI was founded. I think they were even too young to really register a company by themselves. So I think they had to ask their parents or something to do that for them, I heard. So they didn't produce a camera at first. The first product they did in 1917 was film printers. They actually built their own film printers. They bought some used equipment from a second-hand market and then improved it and made some product out of it. And it became a little business. And by 1920, they already had some improved versions and sold the first film printer to the US. So that was basically the first product and the start of international business. I think many people associate ARRI with cameras. And I think nowadays that's totally valid because our main product is actually the camera. But back in those days, really film processing and film equipment, film processing equipment was also a big business. From 1962 to 1980, ARRI supplied a wide range of laboratory equipment to film processing facilities and was much far beyond the camera. In 1924, the first ARRI camera was launched. That was a ARRI 35, a 35mm camera, hand cranked for 100 feet of standard 35mm film. And 4 years later, they launched a 16mm version of this. Now, one of the most iconic cameras that ARRI launched was the ARRI Flex 35 in 1937. And that was the first camera with a reflex mirror shutter, you know, a spinning mirror shutter that makes motion pictures. And it was actually quite difficult to do because the mass of a spinning mirror at that time to control this very precisely and synchronize it with a film movement was not an easy task to do. And the guy you see here on the image is actually the chief engineer who did this. He is called Erich Kästner. And even though many other people tried before to make such a camera, he was the first one who really successfully made it into a commercial product. Now, why was it so special and what was the advantage of this? Of course, you could see through the lens, through the viewfinder, so you could really see what you're recording, because as you see here on the image, the picture would be reflected by the mirror and then shown in the viewfinder. It's basically like a SLR camera, like a SLR still camera nowadays, but of course, moving pictures. It was a very successful product over the years. 17,000 ARRI 35 cameras with follow-up models were sold. Back in the days, it was not digital, and the lifespan of a camera was much, much longer than nowadays. Even though I must say the Alexa lifespan is also relatively long for a digital camera. And then in 1982, ARRI founded the subsidiary ARRI Video, which was later called ARRI Film and TV and eventually ARRI Media in Munich. And they did post-production and distribution of films. So by doing this, ARRI actually not only learned the camera side, but also how to handle the images and how to distribute them, and really got profound knowledge of video images. Now here you see the 435, which was becoming the workhorse of the film industry. It was launched in 1994. It went up to 150 frames per second, and was just really used for music videos, commercials. It's also perfect for visual effects with the speed, and very popular for the next 15 years. But at that time, also film stocks developed further, but finer grain, better sensitivity, better dynamic range. So it was a very exciting time, and film was produced a lot, and many great movies were shot. Now, the background in film, laboratory equipment, and post-production services helped ARRI to continue advancing tools in this area. And ARRI's CEO, Franz Krauss, who joined the company first in 1983, had very early already anticipated the advances to digital cinematography and slowly re-engineered ARRI from a fine mechanics company to a company also doing electronics and dealing with digital images. So if you think of a film camera, it's basically like a sewing machine, right? You have the spinning mirror shutter, and the film has to be standing while it's exposed, and then the shutter moves further and the film is transported. It's actually what the sewing machine does, right? You pull it and you put your thread and so on. So it's basically a fine mechanics company. So in 1998, ARRI actually launched the ARRI laser. At that time, there was already film scanners from other companies and a digital intermediate process where the film would post-produce digitally. And then, because the cinemas were still projecting analog film, had to be brought back on film. And the ARRI laser actually used some solid-state lasers to do this, and was very advanced at the time, and even won a technical Oscar later in 2002. But this was actually really the first really serious product of ARRI that was basically a digital product. Yeah, and through knowing how to deal with the digital images and then bring them back on film in a way that they look very filmic and natural, that was already a first translation between digital and analog. And the ARRI engineers and scientists spent a lot of time and effort to really understand how to deal with the image so that it looks really, really organic film when it's back lasered on the film. So in 2003, ARRI launched the last 35mm film camera, which was the ARRI Flex 235. It was a very nice and almost sexy design. People used to say it's like putting a cat on the shoulder. And in 2006, at NAB, ARRI introduced the final analog film camera in the market, the ARRI Flex 416, a 16mm camera. And just as a 235, it was designed by engineers who had actually worked for decades together designing film cameras. So there was really not much friction. And you could feel this when you use this camera. And even nowadays, if you look on maybe Xianyu and you look for a 416, it's actually quite demanded and they're quite expensive. They're actually more expensive now to buy a nice used 416 than back in the days when they were sold as a new product. And that was, by the way, also interesting because when I joined ARRI and I did those WC4 hand units and all those products, there were still the engineers who did the film cameras. So it was still, those people were kept, they designed the hardware. Now, in 2004, ARRI launched the ARRI Scan film camera using a CMOS sensor to capture the analog film images and transfer them to the digital world. In previous years, Kodak had run a research project. Kodak had their telecine scanners, and they researched on how to translate or represent analog image in the digital domain. And they developed the Cineon format, which was a file format that contained a logarithmic encoding of the scanned film images. And the project manager at the time was Glenn Kennell. Glenn Kennell today is the president of sales of the ARRI Americas in the USA in Los Angeles. So the Cineon format was used also for the ARRI scan, and the engineers got very familiar for it. They actually researched a lot about it and also researched about color science, how to make a scanned image really look very filmic in the digital world. And I think that's really a key point in the development of the Alexa camera, that ARRI really understood how to translate a film image from an analog film into the digital world. And that happened first in the ARRI scanner. Now, the sensor, was in the scanner, but Mr. Krauss, again, thought, well, let's do more. Let's investigate more how we can use it as a camera. So they built something like a bread box in the year 2000. So took those boards in the sensor and put it in a box, which didn't look at all like a film camera. It couldn't also be used on set, but it produced decent images. And these images were actually looking very good and usable. And 3 years later, a couple of years later, in 2005, they launched their first digital camera, the ARRI D20, which was exclusively used in the ARRI rental. So by doing this, they put it in the field, they shoot with it, and they gain further experience with how it performs actually in the field. 3 years later, it was then launched as a D21 successor product, which could be bought, but it was still a relatively big camera with a passive cooling system, no onboard recording. It was kind of special still for this time. Now by 2007, a lot of great movies had been shot with ARRI film cameras, and including E.T. here on the lower right. I remember that was my father took me to the cinema. It was very special for me. I was 6 years old at that time. And in the same year, ARRI started developing a new version of the 435 camera, the 435 high-speed model, which could run up to 250 frames per second. But unfortunately, in 2008, in autumn 2008, the film camera market collapsed. There was a financial crisis with the Lehman Brothers. There was also an anticipated strike of the Screen Actors Guild in the US, and Red had announced the Red 1 camera a little while ago. So the rental houses were not really confident in investing in new camera equipment. Those film cameras were really expensive. The red camera was costing like a tenth of the price of an ARRI Cam LT. And pretty much my colleague used to call it like a cliff, pretty much in the autumn of 2008, ARRI didn't sell any film cameras anymore. And then all the resources, all the R&D resources, research and development, went into the project that would later be known as Alexa. Now, the user interface for the 435 high-speed camera that was already started, there were already functioning prototypes of the 435 high-speed. The user interface was overtaken and used for the Alexa camera. You know, the user interface of Alexa is on the right side, the screen with 3 buttons on top, 3 buttons on the bottom. Very familiar. Actually, every modern digital motion picture camera nowadays looks like that, or at least many. And that had the beginnings in the analog film camera times. Yeah. Also, the viewfinder that would later be used for the Alexa Studio, the optical viewfinder, was also actually designed for the 435 high speed. So in a very real sense, actually, the Alexa camera carries a lot of the DNA from the old film cameras. Now here you see some Alexa design prototypes. On the lower left, you see the size of the Alexa early prototype model in comparison with the D21. So it was already much more compact than the previous digital camera. On the upper left side, you see we called it the toaster. It looks a little bit like a toaster, but it is the sensor prototype, which was shown at IBC 2009 to show how the image actually looks. And then on the right side, you see a very early prototype of the Alexa. And you see it actually has a shape of a film camera. That round shape of the film cameras was like they looked, and the very early design of Alexa looked a little bit like that. Now, the film cameras looked the way they looked, of course, because there was film inside and the film spools were round, so the form followed the function. And there was really not much beautification in it. They looked the way they looked because it made sense. And the Alexa camera actually had boards, PCB prints, board sensor in it, and all those components were actually quite square, right? You don't have a nice swung around board in it, electronics board. So that is also why the camera in the end became the way it looked, a little bit like a box. Then at NAB 2010, and that is when I joined the team, we launched the first 3 models: Alexa EV with the electronic viewfinder, Alexa Plus with the integrated lens control system, and Alexa Studio with the optical viewfinder. And initially, the plan was actually to launch the Alexa Studio first as a premium model, and then come later with the cheaper versions. But because of the financial crisis, and of course it's the most expensive version, because of the financial crisis, they decided to change this and launch the cheapest version first, which was 50,000 euros at that time, which was really cheap for an ARRI camera. But the thing was that the sensor was already designed for the Alexa Studio. So the sensor was like top notch, no compromise. Also the form factor, and they had to use the sensor and put it in the beginning model in the Alexa EV without any compromise. Yeah, it got really this good sensor, and this sensor actually went to all the Alexa cameras. You will see we made a lot of models of the Alexa over the years, and they all shared the same sensor. Maybe some minor iterations. Until the Alexa 35, which was really a new design of the sensor, and I'll talk about that later. Now here you see Roger Deakins, and he actually, you know, he did the James Bond films and many other great films, and he he really liked the Alexa with the optical viewfinder because it really felt like film. Yeah, and one DOP one time told us the Alexa looks, feels, and smells like a film camera. Yeah. So the people didn't really have to learn very much how to use a camera. The user concept, the interfaces, everything looked very familiar, felt very familiar. And also all the accessories around the camera, of course, were fitting. But really, the heart of the Alexa camera is the sensor, and we call it the RLEF3 sensor. And as I told you before, it really produced organic film-like images. Film-like images because it really started with a film scanner to really translate a filmic image to the digital world, in this case now to the camera. The width of the sensor is like 35 millimeter film, 4 perforations. The Alexa EV actually had active recorded area that was 16 by 9, but you could also see beyond and above and below it, so you could see if anything else like a microphone or something comes into the image, and that was very unique at that time, really, to have a sensor with some headroom around it. Later models used the full 4x3 image area, so they could be used with anamorphic lenses. Yeah. One thing very special about that sensor, and that's what also made it comparable with film, is that it had 14 stops of dynamic range. Yeah, in the log-C format, in a logarithmic format that could be recorded. So it basically looked like a film image that was scanned. By the way, log-C, the name log-C comes, the C comes from the Cineon format, which was used in the film cameras, in the film scanners. Now, the way that was made, that high dynamic range was achieved, was that the analog signal output from the sensor was divided in 2 parts, in a low gain and a high gain path. And the high gain path was used for the highlights, and the low gain path for the shadows, and then it was recombined later again. Another very critical point of the Alexa camera sensor was the portrayal of color. And the Alexa really showed nice skin tones, very, very natural, very true. And also very good color separation, which was important for VFX. And there was one quote which the Marvel VFX supervisor, Jake Morrison, said one time, and he said, "I'd rather have better pixels than many pixels." And at the time when that was said, there was actually the 4K discussion going on. Display manufacturers were producing 4K displays, and other camera manufacturers were promoting the 4K resolution. And we made a lot of tests and actually found that the resolution is not the only important thing. It's important that the overall image quality is important, including resolution, dynamic range, and color. And I remember we quoted this quote a lot during those times. Now, a film camera has to work under all conditions. Yeah, it should not break down while you're shooting. It can be very expensive if your camera breaks down. Other manufacturers had that problem, that cameras were maybe not so reliable, so there had to be a second camera for backup. And to make sure that our camera actually withstand all the challenges on a film set, we made a lot of torture tests with them. There was one test, we call it the shaking and the baking test, which was designed actually for the ARRI cam. You know, there was a time when ARRI bought the movie camera brand. We designed the ARRI cam out of it together. And that time there was some new technologies in the ARRI cam, and we wanted to make sure that the camera is as reliable as the ARRI Flex cameras. And there were some tests established to really shake it and make sure nothing gets loose in this really reliable camera. And this was also used for the Alexa cameras. So you see here a shaking machine that is on a very big concrete slab. It was in the cellar of the ARRI building, a very heavy concrete slab, and it would shake the cameras in a way that it emulates 1 week of transport in the worst possible conditions you can imagine, like over rough roads in a lorry. I think more than any possible transport could actually be. And if cameras failed, they would have to be, repaired and so long until it worked. And that has been done with all the cameras, with all the Alexas. It is still done today. So whenever you get an Alexa in your hands from our factory, you can make sure it went through this procedure. Shake it and bake it. So that was a shake. The bake was that we had some kind of ovens there. And the cameras would, the cameras are specified from -20 to +45 degrees. It's a very wide temperature range. I think all of the other cameras usually have a temperature range from 0 to maybe 40 degrees or something like that. But of course, we have to make sure that the camera also works in the ice, in the storm, and so on. So, but the components to make that happen are usually more expensive, and that is also one of the reasons why the Alexa cameras are not cheap cameras, because they are really built to last. They have special components in there, just no compromise to make it work. Because in the end, if your camera fails and you have maybe 150 people on set and they have to wait for some hours to replace a camera, it's actually more important, more expensive than just having a camera that just works and works and works. Now in this baking test, they're put in this oven and temperature is going up and down several times. And lastly, there's a 24-hour burn-in where it's just very limited cooling and the cameras have to survive. So that actually this temperature stress expands and compresses the boards in the camera, and by this we can really emulate conditions on set and make sure that if something is not proper, it fails with us and not at the customer on set. So here you see my friend Rolf Steinmann. He came to our office one day. He was a young nature photographer, nature documentary filmer. And he did something crazy. It was in the beginning of the Alexa times, and he came and he said, I want to buy my Alexa. Yeah, and he bought his own Alexa, which for me at the time was quite impressive because not a cheap camera. I think he also bought a Alova Zoom, I'm not sure. And he went to the most remote places you can imagine in the world. And when he had a passion for really cold places, he even did his own projects, and just because he loves it so much. He filmed some bisons in I think northern Canada. But he also went to Congo and whatnot, filming gorillas. So he did all the times, all the way on the road, and that's him. And on such a day, he's waiting and waiting until that animal comes. The camera would look like that. But it would still turn on. The batteries would be a problem, but the camera would just work. And Rolf told us that in the evening, he usually goes to his tent. He puts on his camping stove, and he warms his laptop on the camping stove, make it warm. And he puts the S/S cards in and download the material from the camera. Now, why does it work? Of course, there was also some clever engineering from the ARRI engineers in it. We actually, here in the middle, the yellow part, that is the electronics part. And we sealed this, completely sealed this, so no moisture, no dust gets in it. But of course, the sensor and also electronic generate heat. There was a lot of processing in it. It's actually a little supercomputer, such a camera. And this heat has to get out. And if it's all sealed, it doesn't get out. So there are some heat pipes which transport the heat to a radiator, which is at the back, and then there's a big fan blowing it out. one of the project managers, I think one of the engineers was a rocket scientist previously, and I think those heat pipes are also used in satellites or something like that. Now, like that, you could, of course, also even shoot in very hot conditions, like here in the desert, and can go very close to the fire and can be very hot. And then this happened. It didn't happen in the desert. This is actually in 2011 when my colleagues went to Los Angeles just before the NAB show, and they visited a camera rental house, and the camera rental house said, "We have a problem. One of our trucks just burned. One of the camera trucks just burned." And the camera was inside, was completely burned. The engineers looked at it and said, "Well, let's try it out. Let's put a lens on it and let's put power on it." And it powered up. And it actually showed a beautiful image, just like before. So we took this camera and took it. We quickly built a vitrine for our booth at the NAB show and put it there, and everybody talked about it. And I remember we had it for a while in the ARRI headquarters. There was a little showcase. You go up the stairs to sales and product management. And we had that camera there. And there was a button. There was a glass vitrine, and there was a button. And you could press a button, and the camera would power up and show a beautiful image. It's a little bit showing off, but we liked it. Now, of course, as you know, our cameras are not consumer products. Yeah, they are really investment goods, somehow exotic industrial machinery. That's the beautiful part of ARRI. Yeah, we make products that are really high tech, that are really made to make money, but we make it for people like you who are so creative and technical at the same time, and that mix is really cool. But the customers who actually buy this, many of them at least, are rental houses. And rental houses, of course, as any other rental, even a car rental or whatever, they think of return of invest. They're spending that money for the device, and they want to use it as long as possible and make as much money as possible with it. And of course, if you design a product, you also have to have this in mind. Not only the beautiful images and not only the reliability and all this from the user perspective, but also you have to think the one who is buying that product, what's important for them. The rental manager probably doesn't really care very much about the image quality, but he cares that the camera lasts long and that he can make his money back, his investment. So because we knew this and we had a long history of camera equipment in this professional market, we designed the camera in a way that it would allow regular software updates. So we had FPGAs in there, not ASICs. So we could always design new software. So the camera could actually grow with our customers. We had regular software update, adding new functions, free of charge at those times. And on the hardware side, we also made the camera upgradable. So here on the left, you see the right side cover with the user interface of the camera. And we had a model that would have no integrated motor control, just the user interface. But we also had a model that had an integrated motor control. So you could put the lens motors on it, and there was an antenna, and you could use the WCO4 to control this. That was the part where I was involved quite a bit with the camera. And people who decided to buy an Alexa without that module could later on just buy the upgrade and upgrade it to that model. Same for the recording media on the right side. We knew that recording media is developing. It was a time when new formats came out, when the data rates got higher and new solid state media were developed. So we know there will be a new recording format, and we designed the right side cover in a way that it could be, the left side cover in a way that could be replaced. And the customers were safe and really had very long investment cycles. There were also some crazier models, which were a little bit special. Here on the left, it's the Alexa M. It's a modular camera, so the head was separated from the body. That was, I think it was around 2012 when it was launched. That was a time when 3D was big. The 3D was everywhere, and people wanted to have a smaller, lightweight camera to put on a 3D rig. It was nice for us because on a 3D rig, you would always say two cameras, one looking for the right eye and one looking for the left eye. But it should be at least possible, so we reduced, we separated the head from the body. That's why some people made the jokes and said the M stands for Marie Antoinette because the head is cut off from the body. And then you on the right side you see the Alexa HD fiber remote. That was around a little bit more than 10 years ago, and that was actually an Alexa model that was designed for live production. It was the Alexa camera, but there was a special interface on the camera. We have those remote control signals from the control room of a broadcasting station, for example. And that were really our first steps with the digital camera into broadcast and live production. In the analog times, our film cameras were used a lot on documentaries and also broadcast recordings. But here with Alexa, it was the first digital attempt with the Alexa HD fiber remote. In 2014, we went one step further with the Amira. It's now a different name, not the Alexa, but also a women's name, like a beautiful camera, nice name, Amira. And it was designed particularly for documentary filmers. Yeah, it has a different user design. The Alexa camera was designed for crews to operate. That is why it had on the right side, it had the user interface. So the camera assistant could set up the camera while the DP, or the camera operator, would frame the image through the viewfinder. The Amira had a different concept. It had a concept that if you are a single person responsible for the camera, you can shoot with the Amira perfectly, and you don't need another person doing this on the other side. And that is why it also doesn't have a user interface on the right side. Around that time, gimbals were big. Many gimbals came up. There were also drones coming up. And Red One actually had a pretty the Red company had a pretty compact camera, and we saw that actually we need a camera that's a little bit smaller than the Alexa camera, but no cable on it, like the Alexa M. So we made a project and like miniaturized the electronics of the Amira into a new camera, which was a little square camera with very limited interfaces, and we called it Alexa Mini. Now, the Alexa Mini was actually designed to be a companion camera to the big Alexa for drones, underwater, and so on. But pretty soon, actually, we found that it's used a lot as an A camera as well, because it's so flexible, so lightweight. And we sold a lot of it, also made accessories. You know, we don't only make the cameras, we also have complete accessory system around it. And yeah, it was a big success, and also made me really happy because I had designed the WCO4 with the for the Alexa Plus camera, the remote control unit, which you see here on the image. But with the Alexa Mini, it really took off. So the idea why I made this WCO4 for the Alexa was that now we had a digital camera, and we said, well, if you have a digital camera, you can actually do much more with the remote control than just controlling focus, iris, and zoom. So we implemented some features that you can change camera settings like frame rate, exposure index, shutter angle, and so on. And that was nice with the Alexa cameras, but with the Alexa Mini, it really took off. And the reason for that is that the user interface was quite limited on the camera itself. It was used a lot on drones or anywhere where you can't really access it. So people really like to use the WCO4 to control this camera. Now, the problem was that the camera was so small, it actually didn't have enough real estate to put many connectors. And with the Alexa Plus camera, we had 3 connectors for lens control. 1 connector for focus motor, 1 connector for zoom motor, and 1 connector for the iris motor. But there was no space on this camera. It was just too small. So we developed a new interface, call it the L-bus interface. And that allowed to daisy chain up to 3 motors from 1 connector on the lens mount. Now comes the big things. In 2015, we launched the Alexa 65 camera. The Alexa 65 camera is actually, you could call it the digital sibling of the 765 analog film camera, which was also designed by us some years ago. The story of the 765 is also an interesting one because it was created to just get better resolution on film, to get better resolution images. And by the time it was ready and brought into the market, Kodak actually improved the film and made it much more finer grain. So it was not really so necessary anymore to have a 70mm, a 65mm film camera. But it was still in the rental and used a lot for plate shots and so on. Now, with the Alexa 65, we wanted to really get the best digital image camera somebody could make. And if not ARRI, then who else? And made it in a way, actually, so this is the Alexa 65 sensor. Took 3 Super 35 sensors, turned it basically by 90 degrees and combined them together. So that's called stitching. So the Alexa 65 actually has an image area like 3 Alexa Super 35 sensors. 10 years later, not long time ago, we launched the Alexa 265, which is basically the second version of the 65 camera. It's like the 435 was basically the 4th version of a 35mm camera. So the 265 is the second version of a 65mm digital camera. And and that's 3 times smaller and lighter than the Alexa 65, and also has some really cool features. Like here next to the lens mount, you see a little door, which is for filters. So you can put ND filters there, or creative filters, or creative optical elements. It's now being used worldwide, including in China. And I'm really curious to see what the creative community creates with it. There's 2 examples shot with the Alexa 65. And after we launched that camera, the demand for larger format cameras actually grew. And people said, well, we also want to shoot with this camera. But the Alexa 65 was actually so difficult to make and would have been so expensive that most of the rentals we asked if they would buy it said, no, it's too expensive. You do it. That was before the development. So it was a camera that was exclusively financed and then also exclusively rented out through the ARRI rental. So we designed a new sensor which actually has a super 35mm full frame image area. Here you see one straight out of the factory, and made a product and called it Alexa LF, which we launched in 2018. And LF, of course, stands for large format. With the Alexa LF, we didn't only make a large format full frame sensor. We also introduced a new lens mount system. ARRI had already made the PL mount that is very common on many cameras in the film days. But now for the large sensor, in order to accommodate a nearly telecentric lens design, we needed a larger diameter lens mount, and then launched the LPL lens mount, which is basically like a big PL lens mount with the Alexa LF. Now this lens mount has been adopted by many other manufacturers as well, by many lens manufacturers. And on top of that, we also launched the LDS2 system. LDS stands for Lens Data System. That's basically that the lens speaks to the camera, and in post-production or on the WCO4, you could have the lens data and see your focus, iris, and zoom settings, including depth of field, range. There are many adapters to the LPL mount for our existing cameras. And then in 2019, we basically took the front end from the Alexa LF and the back end from the Alexa Mini and combined it and made the Alexa Mini LF. Also as a companion to the big Alexa LF, didn't do the high frame rates the Alexa LF could do, but was really perfect companion, just like the 65 and 265, like around 3 times smaller, and really welcomed. And even this camera nowadays is very popular and also used a lot as an A camera. So this was all with the ALEF 3 sensor that was launched with the Alexa, with the initial Alexa in 2010. And during that time, of course, our engineers always investigate what can we do better. They talk to a lot of people, get a lot of feedback from the field, from post-production camera people, and so on. And then all this feedback that was collected over the years was then taken, and then we made a new sensor, and with a new sensor also a new camera, and we said we were raising the bar. So already with the Alexa we kind of raised the bar, and now we are raising it again one more time. The Alexa 35 was launched in June 2022, and I remember when it was launched, you know, maybe you know this, there's the HBO camera assessment series. So the HBO guys make a test and compare the current state-of-the-art cameras, and they always try to break the image. They put very high dynamic range sceneries, or they put wicked patterns that cause moire, or they try to really shoot in the dark and see how the noise is. And what I remember that it was really special because the Alexa 35 with the new sensor had a really high dynamic range with 17 stops, and it was just unbreakable. We had a very high contrast image, and couldn't get it really to overexpose. The sensor was 4.6K. I didn't mention this, Super 35 sensor, so native 4.6K, fulfilling all the 4K mandates, and at the same time covering all common spherical and anamorphic lenses, yeah, which was not necessarily the case with the LF cameras. Another new thing besides, by the way, this is an underwater scene. This is an underwater torch. It's super bright, and the scenery is actually super dark, and you could grade it in a way that you still have details where you want to have it. Now, the Alexa color science was already really good, and it's always hard to improve good things, but that's actually exactly what we did with the Alexa 35. So we launched a new color science for the Alexa 35 and called it the Reveal Color Science. And the Reveal Color Science can capture much more complex colors than most other digital cameras. It can just see more nuances. It can see finer steps in between the hues. So here you're seeing an image rendered with the previous ARRI color science. I'm not sure if you can this. And Yeah, so this is a previous ARRI color science, and this is a reveal color science. There are probably some artifacts from the LED wall, but if you look here at the clock, for example, and I switch between the two images, you will see that with the reveal color science, you actually have much more separation in the colors, and that's of course very, very useful to play with in post-production. Every Alexa has a certain look, how the contrast and noise is handled in the camera, and we call this certain thing a texture. And with the previous Alexa cameras, we predefined this. We found what is the best possible way to create an image. But with the Alexa 35, we actually let you choose certain textures. So we predefined certain textures for different situations. And the textures actually tune how the camera sees the world. Some can enhance landscapes with some details and trees or whatever. Others can soften some faces, like you see here in this image. I don't know if you see this, but maybe you see it on a really good screen. You can see this and can also zoom in. And then, for example, there's another texture also reducing color and the dark noise of the image. Now the Alexa is being used quite a lot, the Alexa 35. Here you see those festival charts. It's quite popular right now, and it makes us, of course, very happy. Now, some minutes ago, I mentioned the Alexa HD Fiber remote camera, which was our first camera for live production. And for the Alexa 35, we also designed a version that actually adapts a fiber adapter to the Alexa 35 and can be used for live production. And that also really makes sense. It's used on concerts and sports events right now, because if you light a film set, you can actually, if it's inside, pretty well control the lighting, right? You don't necessarily need a very high dynamic range. When you're outside, it's maybe a different thing. You can save a lot of money by just using natural light. But on an event, you actually many times can't control this at all. Yeah, just imagine you have a light show on a concert, or you have a football game in a stadium. There's just no way really to control the light. And with the 17 stops of the dynamic range, you can actually work very well and great in a way that you know from a broadcast workflow. So this camera actually can connect to those remote control panels that are maybe in OB vans, and also have some predefined looks on it. So you can be really creating special looks and then at the same time fine-tuning it live for production. Now, that's almost my last slide. This is the Alexa 35 base, and the Alexa 35 base is just a normal Alexa 35 camera for a lower price point. I wouldn't say cheap, because Alexa ARRI cameras are never really cheap, but it has a lower entry level with a basic feature set. So it goes up to 60 frames per second, still has the 17 stops, low noise, blah, 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 all what Alexa 35 has. But then you can buy licenses of features you need on top. So for example, you could have a 120 frames per second license, or you could have an anamorphic license, or you could have a look license whenever you need it. So you can customize the camera to your needs. Those licenses can be purchased online or directly from us at ARRI China or anywhere else in the world, either as a permanent license or as a temporary license. Yeah, so it could be for 7 days, for 30 days, or for 1 year. So that's it. That's the Alexa story, the way I wanted to tell it to you, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm actually, I think at ARRI we all love filmmaking, and we also all love products. And I can say this about myself, and I know this from my colleagues. Creating a product is also really a passionate process. Yeah, you talk to a lot of people, and you hear the feedback, and you think about it, and you have a lot of ideas, and you know that if you put it all into the product, it will be super expensive and super big and super heavy. So you have to make decisions what to put in the product, and shrink it down to the essence, to the really important thing that makes a product really usable and also lovable. I always used to tell my friends, a product must, of course, fulfill a purpose, but it must also be kind of sexy, and it must be fun to use. And I hope and I think that our products do this. And now I'm here for your questions and answers. And I must say, I'm really happy to connect to you. I'm now here in China. I want a little bit to be your voice to the headquarters, and I'm curious to hear what you like and what you miss and what you want and all your thoughts. Probably not only when I'm on stage here, but also later when we maybe have a drink or whatever, when you send me WeChat message. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I know it's partly a little bit technical. That's it.